Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Chicanery. We are your hosts. I am Danny, and we have JT.
Hello again.
And so we are back, and we have the Detroit Grand Prix weekend. So that is, of course, IMSA and IndyCar. Um, so this was very much kind of a weekend of two halves. Of course, you have the IMSA race, which is the IMSA race. I mean, it's fine, it's fun. Um, but we also had the IndyCar race, which was just about one of the most chaotic things I think I've ever seen. Um, Now, granted, IMSA did not exactly keep their hands clean either, but again, we'll get into all of that. That's we're going a little hard on expedition there. So, moving on, we'll get into kind of news cycle things. Um, so, to start out, um, is that well, and I first of all, I want to say I love the way you phrased this on the notes. It was absolutely hilarious. So I will read this verbatim because I feel like the listener should get this too. And that is that Meyer Shank Racing sends Blomqvist to the gulag for the next two races, Detroit and Road America. Castroneves to fill in for the time being. Because that's really what happened. Um, So a few things. This is a bit more complex than that. To be fair, this was a uh, this was a mutual agreement. Certainly at the time in which the notes were written, though it's confirmed that he will be back. It was uncertain if he'll return. Um, it was confirmed in the lead up to Detroit um, that it was Winter Circle was the main motivation because I think that car is 22nd, at least at the time of the lead up to Detroit. Anyway, I think it was 22nd in points, and Winner Circle is top 20, if I remember that correctly. It's odd and convoluted, and nobody really talks about it enough, so I never really remember. but but at any rate, I guess questions are: was this a good decision, and if this was truly justified or not? So I guess I'll open the floor to you first, and then I'll go.
I mean, as far as it stands right now, no, it was not a good decision, and it's not justified. And it's because it's like, well, you replaced him with Elio, who, quite frankly, is not going to do any better. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I love Elio to bits. I truly, no disrespect, no shade or anything, but he is not going to do any better, unfortunately. And I mean, we saw it just in this weekend. I mean, he finished like I think like in the 20s somewhere. Like, I mean, he finished laps down, and it's like, I mean, sure. Like, if you want to replace him with somebody who actually is going to, like, I don't know, put up better results, I guess, if that's like kind of the justification why they're doing it. But I mean, currently, I mean, he is only in for like these two races. I mean, Road America's coming up, and after that, I don't know what else is going to happen. Um, I'm assuming they're probably going to end up like having like Mo Lucas or somebody is probably going to end up in that seat or something at some point. Um, because, well, the NBC broadcast inadvertently kind of like leaked, or kind of basically they leaked it, that he was not going to be back in the car for the rest of the season. So probably somebody else is going to end up taking that spot. Um, I mean, initially I thought it was like a Freudian slip or something by like Marty Snyder. I'm like, okay, did I hear that right? And everybody else started tweeting about it. I'm like, okay, I definitely heard what I heard. And that's what it was. So, like, currently, right now, no, they look kind of stupid because it's like, again, Elio's not doing any better. But, I mean, if they can find somebody who can do a lot better, sure. I mean, I know they were in like an article, they were talking about, oh, like, trying to stop the bleeding, I guess. And it's like, sure. But currently, right now, you look like you're putting band aids on stab wounds, which is not really doing much.
I like that variation. I always say band-aids on bullet wounds, but actually, I think I like stab wounds better. Uh, but yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think you're absolutely right. This so far is not panning out. Now, in fairness, from what at least, and again, we'll get into this in the race. Issues, incidents, to quote one Monegasque driver, this didn't seem like this was exactly Elio's fault. It seemed like he got Ferrucci'd. But
I mean,
like I
there's
said,
a
hey,
reason they had him on like just doing the Indy 500 only. So,
yeah, I mean, and that's just what I was about to get to. This is not. It's not 2005 anymore, and Elio's on top of the world and can do no wrong. Homeboy he's gotten older, frankly. And I mean, and this is a thing, it's talked about a lot, is that, eventually, I mean, Father Time waits for no one. And well, it's catching up with Elio. He's still OP as anything at Indianapolis, but frankly, that's really about it. Um, and yes, certainly, and I understand, certainly with other drivers like, Malukas and what have you, those are drivers that are not on Meyer Shanks's books. Elio is a very, at least for Meyer Shank, is a very plug and play option. So I understand why, if you're going to pick anybody short term at least, why you would do that. But yeah, it's no bueno. And yes, certainly results based. As a result, it's not really showing through. Um, now granted, and again, thank you very much, because you made my life easy. You did writing notes, did a little bit of math, compiling certainly all of Blomqvist's results, and 15th at St. Pete, 22nd at Long Beach, 19th at Barber, and 23rd at Soncia. That basically puts you at about P20 average, um, which has you right on the bubble for winner circle, until you get to the Indy 500, where because of that turn one, lap one incident, it was 31st, scored 31st, and that's really going to sink the number. Like I said, I do believe it's something like 22nd. Now, interestingly enough, and it's funny, clearly I saw the same things that you did. There was some chatter about Blomqvist and IndyCar as a sort of stopgap measure for IMSA, which is a curious thought. I mean, it's worth noting that the whole Meyer Shank in IMSA IndyCar, this weirdness is kind of reaching something of a fever pitch at the moment. And that basically Meyer Shank is gonna, circle back to IMSA and basically take over the Acura program again. As it's rumored that Wayne Taylor and Andretti are moving over to Cadillac. But that's a different podcast. But yes, and that basically Blomqvist would be plugged in there. But it's worth noting that, nothing's really confirmed yet. And that would be a hell of a gamble. I don't know. It's weird and seems a little bit far-fetched personally.
I mean, it kind of makes a little bit of sense, like when you think about it, because I mean, it's an easy way to keep Blomqvist, a pretty good bang up driver in sports car racing, in the sphere of Meyer Shank racing, and still keep him within arm's reach and stuff like that. Because you don't really want. I'm sure they don't really want to like lose him, so it's like it's easier just to like sign him in IndyCar, and technically, like part of me was like, well, maybe this doesn't make a whole lot of sense for this to be the case because when they did sign him, it was a multi-year contract, and for him to be out mid-season on his first year with the contracted with the team in IndyCar, just seemed a little bit weird. But I mean, technically, you can piece it together a little bit because I mean, technically multi-year contract for all intents and purposes could have been because Meyershank Racing didn't know how long they were going to be out of IMSA for. It technically, so far, it seems it's trending towards that they're going to be back next season at the Rolex 24 in 2025. So that was only like about what, a year.
Yeah.
So they might not have known that, and that's why they did multi-year in case they were out for longer than a year. And they can easily just shuffle him back over. He is currently contracted though with Action Express Racing at least for the endurance rounds, but I guess like technically they could buy him out, or if he really wants to. I'm sure there's like some type of escape clause in his contract. I think most drivers seem to like have that in their contracts with teams. Um, I mean, we've seen it in F1 with Lewis Hamilton. That's how he ended up going to Ferrari, was because he activated the escape clause in his contract with Mercedes. So technically, the same thing could happen here.
Yeah. Pardon me. Yeah, and that's to be fair, that's actually a good thought, and is not a way that I had looked at it. But it's all so weird, and I think that that's probably what's giving me the most hangups about all of this. It's just like, ugh. Um, and then the funny thing is that this also, the funny thing is that he's missing Le Mans for basically nothing because he was on the books for an IndyCar test that now he won't be doing. So unless dude pulls something out of his behind here in the next 11 days as of the time of this recording. Um yeah, it's like okay.
I mean, I
So
don't. He's gonna miss the race because I think testing for Le Mans is starting this weekend, so you can't really crunch that. I don't think.
yeah, that's a fair point. I forgot about that. So yeah, it all seems very silly and it's not gonna happen. Um,
I mean, either way, at the end of the day, I think Meyershank Racing needs to refund me on my big Quest Energy shirt that I'm currently wearing right now because they messed it up. Okay, they fucked it up, so they need to refund me, honestly.
yeah, well, we'll have to take that up with them because that is absolutely right. And I had completely forgotten that the Big Quest Energy shirts and things existed. I was gonna buy one, and I'm actually kind of glad that I didn't now. But moving on, is that sort of Dale Coyne and their the odd sort of revolving door of drivers that they seem to have going on in the 51 is that they've got Tristan Vautier is making his triumphant return. Of course, he was an IndyCar Series regular many moons ago. I think the last time he had a full-time drive was like 2016, 2017, something like that. I'd have to go back and look that up, but it's been a long time is my point. Um, and yeah, well, he like I say, he back. Um, then Joseph Newgarden has got a contract extension with Team Penske. As what seems to be current convention is, we don't know how much or really how long because I guess just nobody talks about that anymore, which is annoying. But we'll figure it out in time. Um, but also, and this is kind of a funny thing, but I do think it's worth pointing out is that I would love to, and this is also probably more topic for Art. Maybe I'll have to posit this with him later. But marketing and what have you, like whoever does that in IndyCar, like all of them just need to be binned off like immediately. Fire them into Lake Michigan, I guess, or wherever. It's like I don't understand how you can simultaneously completely blow it with trying to go, rah rah chaotic Indy 500, but then also completely botch the fact that then the following round is essentially the home race of one of your engine suppliers. Like, how have you worked it that conclusively? I don't know.
I mean, some people thought that maybe like the reason why this happens or why the hype just drops off so badly is because like, well, maybe it's the track. maybe you don't need a street course right after the Indy 500, like an oval. Maybe it's not the best like way to go about shifting. Like it might be easier to shift the hype a little bit if maybe they went to another oval after the Indy 500 instead of street circuit, maybe, and that's part of it. I mean, the big part of it is because they just don't know how to market things correctly, or they just refuse to or unable to. I don't know what it is at this point. At this point, I just feel like it's probably just refusal. But I mean, even like the whole week up to like leading up to Detroit, you had people like begging them to like post things about Detroit. I mean, they were still posting like stuff about the Indy 500 like leading up, and it's like, sure, fine. The Indy 500 was great. But at the same time, it's like you have other races on the calendar that you need to promote, and then you know, as per usual, I mean, the attendance or like the viewership numbers came out today as they usually do, and of course they were low, like around like 600,000 or something, which they usually are pretty low. Like the race after the 500, the viewership numbers typically low. Like that's not unusual. That's not weird. That's what usually happens. So in that regard, it's not really a surprise. However, like there's things that they could do to not have that happen, or at least like I don't know, maybe just start with actually like putting in effort to promote the next race. I mean, I don't know. I literally at this point am at a loss for words, and I kind of just feel like I'm preaching to the choir a little bit and kind of just saying the same thing that I've probably already said before.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say. We had this conversation when we had around Christmas time when we had Lauren on. We had a very in-depth conversation about basically this. So certainly, if you want more in-depth thoughts, go and give that a listen. It's great. Lauren's great. Um, but but yeah, it is. It's so frustrating in the part. And admittedly, for me, it's, a little tough. We've talked about it a bunch. Of course, I'm a Detroit native. I mean, hell, that is literally on our logo. And so it frustrates me. And, when we talk about, after these big crown jewel events, like I said, it's not just a thing with IndyCar, it's a thing with a lot of different series, is that generally, well, unless you're Formula One and it's Monaco, then everybody hates it. And then usually the next race does disproportionately well. But with everybody else, it's that, the viewership numbers are low, but the issue is that Detroit has been around after Indy for a long time. And it always frustrates me to no end to see that, at least from a viewership perspective, that the race always does so poorly. And everybody, and then of course you always get the calls of, oh, well, been off Detroit, blah, blah, blah. Never mind the fact that, Detroit Grand Prix has been the fixture, hmm, pardon me, on the IndyCar schedule for a very long time. Um,
I mean, Detroit doesn't need to go as like a. I mean, I don't know. I don't really know exactly how I feel about the new layout of Detroit personally. I mean, I kind of don't really like it, but as like a venue, it doesn't need to go. I mean, you probably would just need to shift it. Maybe again, not be directly the weekend after the 500 and whatnot. Like it's that's really the only thing. And I know the viewership was also low because it was on USA and not NBC like it usually is, which that usually also happens. That also happened with Long Beach, I think, as well. It was low
mhm.
because the race was not on NBC like it usually is. There was something going on, I think, at the time. I think it might have been like golf or something, and that's why they had to switch it. But I'm like, I don't know. If you promoted the race, you never know.
Yeah, exactly. And, and certainly to that end, certainly shifting the date is probably not a bad idea. It's something I've been saying for years because even with crummy viewership, the weather, I mean, it's the first weekend of June in Detroit, the weather is almost always appalling that weekend. Um, and so that has been a real bugbear for basically the last like 15 years. Um, but also the other thing is, I know there's lots of chatter about the circuit. In some ways, I kind of dig it because it's kind of reminiscent of the old F1 street circuit from the early and mid 80s. I also talked about that a little bit in the kind of history of American street circuits in F1 in the lead up to the Las Vegas Grand Prix. So again, go have a listen to that if you haven't already. Um, so I like this layout because it's kind of reminiscent of that, and as a bit of a motorsports history nerd, I think that's kind of cool. Um, but it is worth noting that part of the reason why the race venue was shifted is because Belle Isle, which is where the race used to be held, which is basically this little itty bitty island in the middle of the Detroit River, basically equidistant between city of Detroit and city of Windsor. It's a state park now. Um, so it was originally a city park. It was property of the city of Detroit, and it was that way for a very, very long time. However, when the city filed for bankruptcy in I guess it would have been what, 2013 now, 2014. Dates are getting a little fuzzy because it's been a little while. It fell under the purview of the state, and it was immediately designated state park status. And well, what they did, from what I remember, is they basically told like motorsports and the organizers that they needed to bugger off yesterday. But then you start getting into contracts and it's difficult to unwind that. And there really wasn't a second venue. And the state was like, okay, well, fine. But when the contract expires, you need to go somewhere else. And that was how the race ended up back on the streets of, I guess, mainland Detroit, if you will. Um, but as a direct result of that, where's the Detroit Grand Prix going to go? That becomes the real question. You can't go back to Belle Isle because the state will not allow it. And I would argue, certainly, if you want some of the more iconic sort of visual aspects of the city of Detroit, which I mean, you have, well, what is soon to be GM's former headquarters at the Renaissance Center. And then, you've got, uh, goodness gracious, Huntington Place Center, I think is what it's called now. Used to be called Cobo Arena. If you're a city lifer like me, some of those iconic venues, if you want to have those, it's like, where are you going to put the race that is like attractive? So I don't know. Lots of things to think about. IndyCar also sucks and needs to do a better job about like actually making it so that like people watch it and like care about the race. But this is a different tangent entirely. But getting into the first event of the weekend, which is the IMSA Chevrolet Grand Prix of Detroit. So this is a sprint race. So pretty quick. It's 100 minutes, so an hour and 40. But any rate, moving on to qualifying. Corvettes qualified 1-2 in GTD Pro, which, well, doing that in the backdrop of the Rinsen is kind of cool. But overall, it was a GT qualifying was pretty quiet. It was an uneventful session. GTP was not. The number 6 Porsche Penske would end up on pole, and GTP after the session would be ended prematurely because Durrani binned the Cadillac again. Like, I don't know. At this rate, GM might start sending him a bill for the amount of cars that he writes off. But yeah, it was just ugh. But speaking of which, the Porsche 963s were all of them were broadly speaking having some issues with making contact with the wall during qualifying, and it seemed to be just them. So I'm not really sure quite what the cause of that is. I don't know. Maybe it's a steering lock thing. I figured it would have been the same between all of them, but given that those cars are long and Detroit is narrow, maybe there's just some minor difference in like steering geometry, track width, blah blah blah, overall length that make the Porsches a little bit less wieldy when really pushing the cars. But at any rate, moving on. Good race or no? There's some broader subtext in the background, but we'll get to that in a second. What say you?
I mean, it was okay. I mean, it was alright. It wasn't really all that, though, honestly. First time I'm saying that an IMSA race was kind of disappointing, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Personally, no, not really. It's not really that good. I mean, I feel like the fact that it was so chaotic and people were like crashing, hitting the wall, all that. I mean, I don't. Was there even really that much passing going on? I don't really think there was, to be honest.
Yeah, I honestly kind of agree. The funny thing is, I was super hyped because this is the first year the GTPs being at Detroit, and particularly this incarnation of the circuit because they weren't here last year. Actually, Detroit has largely been GT only for a while. There have been a couple of kind of intervening years where it was DPI prior to GTP, and where you had them. But for the last few years, Detroit has been a GT only affair. So I was so excited for the prospect of the GTPs running around here. And and I mean, that it breaks my heart to say this, but this race did underdeliver sort of the promise that I held for it. And maybe that's an expectation thing. Maybe I'm the idiot here for not tempering curbing my enthusiasm appropriately. But I was definitely a little bummed. Um but yeah, it was a calm race to start out with, but it just became kind of a mess. Kind of like Long Beach, actually. There was an early full course yellow because, well, the Mustang was clearly unhappy about being within a stone's throw of GM's global headquarters and decided it just wasn't going to go. Um, so it broke. Um, the number three Corvette had an alternator issue, which gives me horror flashbacks of when the C7Rs, particularly the number three, had alternator issues. So I just, but it was in the pits for a while. And given that, again, that this is a sprint race, basically any amount of time with a mechanical issue, that's your race is done. Um, the number 24 BMW got a penalty for changing lanes, drive-through penalty rather, for changing lanes before the green flag. Um, and then the number 31 Cadillac, the Action Express car, did it was a it was an early driver change. It was like within 10 minutes, which was weird, but whatever. Um, Porsche Penske basically threw away their victory. Um, Nick Tandy, who's driving the number 6, got into the back of the number 35 GTD Pro of Daniel Serra. Um, and as a result, Tandy got a drive-through penalty for avoidable contact, which is, of course, to clarify, is not intentional contact. But yeah, he botched it yet again, which was fun. And then Connor DeFilippe um, got into the tire barrier in turn 1, leaving the pits on an outlap, which was very stupid but very funny. And it caused a full course yellow. It took the 25 out of contention because it is worth noting that the 25 effectively would have inherited the victory after Nick Tandy and his incident with the Ferrari. So once again, with a case of the RLL BMW, it is so close, but so far. It's that meme where it's like, can you be normal for 5 seconds? And it's just the BMW GTP in the back seat screaming no. And it's it's very frustrating. Um,
Somebody was like, I don't know, 'cause they were talking about it. They're like, oh, like they think that maybe De Filippi's not going to keep his factory seat after this year, which I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's possible.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting. Certainly there have been it's been some incidents this year with De Filippi, which is well, kind of a thing. and is arguably costing results. So we'll have to see what happens. Um,
I mean, personally, I think the main issue is just RLL in general. Like, there's just
yes.
like it's RLL. Like, they just BMW and RLL just need to like file the divorce papers like now probably because and just have this wrapped up by the time the season ends. They're with a different team. Like, I don't know because it's just RLL is not helping the case. I mean, I think part of it is because BMW still has clearly not quite wrapped their heads around this prototype yet. And you couple that with the fact RLL is just incompetent, clearly, and you just get whatever the hell we're seeing right now. I mean, I don't know. It's just like, please, please break up. This is like a toxic relationship. It's like you're just begging people to break up.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not great. And we've talked about it before on this show. RLL and BMW's relationship, in rather, I guess, in the metric of success, has been a bit fraught, kind of off and on for what feels like the last 15, really like the last 10, 15 years at this point. Um, so yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of all of this as a result. But Philippe Nasser was in the number 7, was running pretty well, but got a puncture and had to pit, that's the real Detroit experience. It's rolling around and picking up some road debris that ruins your expensive low profile tires. Ask me how I know. Uh, and to cap it off is yet another instance of Lexus on Corvette terrorism, which I'm starting to get really, really sick of. Um, So the Corvette got number 4 got punted by the 14 going into turn 1. Um, Seems like it was really weird. I mean, it was a bit of late race argy bargy is really what it was. Um, but there's some debate on fault, and some folks thinking it's the Corvette, which I don't really understand quite how that works. But okay, sure. But
I
but
think
that was
the
that.
driver of the Corvette actually like owned up and said that like maybe it was on him. I think it was like Nikki Katzberg or something. Like he kind of like he made a tweet or something in response. It was like basically saying, "Yeah, I think it was more on me."
Which, I mean, that's very sweet of him to own up. I personally, and I've watched that back a few times, I'm not entirely sure that I would personally, if I were to, like, I guess, delineate fault, that I would buy that. But that's fine. Um, but now we get to the meme part. We had a Long Beach like track blockage, but just at Detroit this time. Um, it was so one of the banana boat Porsche um got walloped by the Action Express Cadillac, which was having a weekend. Good lord! Um, and both cars stopped as a result of this. Which then the GTD cars rock up on the scene, and they don't have anywhere to go because, well, as we've talked about, the um, GTP cars are they're long, and that's how a track blockage occurs. Um, the number 31 was penalized for the incident. The number 14, which is one of the cars that rocked up, had a steering. That's a Lexus, so it has a steering issue um, for the rest of the race. The number 10 Acura got around the number 6 for the lead with about 25 minutes to go. Then we got a full course yellow due to debris, which seems to be a recurring theme so far this year in IMSA. Um, then the number 31 again, and the number 5.
The
Um,
number 31 at the scene of the crime again.
yes. Make contact. Number 5 gets into the wall, which causes a full course yellow again. Um, which then it was just chaos. Then the number 35, which had a run in um with a GTP, then gets walloped again, but this time by the number 1 BMW. Um, then you had the Faf McLaren and the number 23 Aston Martin get together, which resulted in the McLaren and the tire barriers. Quite similar to actually the Lexus and Corvette incident a little bit earlier. And the number 9 the McLaren just parked it. That was it. They were done. They were just like, we're just gonna stay here. But all of this results in the number 10 Wayne Taylor with Andretti Acura taking victory in GTP, and Rexy winning in GTD Pro. But oh boy,
Poor
it was a lot,
GM did not win their home race.
which is beyond irritating. Somewhere Mark Royce is probably punching the air, I suspect. But at any rate, moving on. Now we get to the IndyCar Chevrolet Grand Prix of Detroit. So to start things off, is that there were grid penalties for Ray Hall and Kiffin Simpson. They both had engine changes. Fair enough. Which is also wild because then that means that they have chewed through quite a few engines this season. Because I don't believe you actually get in trouble for engine changes, isn't it the third or the fourth engine? I don't remember.
It's like,
But
I think if you change engines 5 times
is that what
before
it is? Okay.
part of the season, they do penalize you.
Yeah, it's like, how on earth have you gone through this many goddamn engines this fast? But anyway, but yes, so that is kind of the broader backdrop of the weekend. Getting into practice, you had basically Ferrucci versus Kirkwood and Herta. This whole thing is very stupid, so please do bear with everybody. You have Ferrucci, Kirkwood, and Herta all kind of have a moment on track together during qualifying, which is fair. Again, it's bumpy and it's narrow. These things happen, right? Kirkwood allows Herta through, and Ferrucci was probably trying to go past as well, but then claims that Kirkwood turned into him, which is like objectively not true. It's odd. Then, Ferrucci basically after the session hops over the pit wall because it's also worth noting Detroit has a split pit lane. It's the only race on the calendar that is like that. To basically confront Kirkwood about the incident, and he was very mad and getting kind of physical about it. And it's funny given the fact that this is a basically the second round in, well, actually no, I'm sorry, it's like the third round in a row with Ferrucci getting it into it with somebody. And then so what comes after this, IndyCar decided maybe we best not promote this. So they had a tweet about it and ended up deleting it. But Kirkwood is just clearly confused and kind of amused because he just kind of walks away shaking his head, laughing. And like, you lost the beef when the guy that you push and are trying to fight just laughs at you. Like, it's great. And, well, I am a bigger Kyle Kirkwood fan after all of this. But then Ferrucci is interviewed about it, and makes a pretty yucky comment about it, which is also amusing given that, Michigan is arguably one of the queerest states in the nation at the moment. And also that the fact that this race took place the weekend prior to Detroit Pride. But at any rate, basically talks about, quotes, Kirkwood and Herta being, quotes, boyfriend teammates. And it's like, bro, I think they're just friends. They
I mean, I
actually
get
like.
it. I mean, I get it. It's a bit shocking for somebody like Ferrucci who, is not really friends with anybody. So, probably seeing a friendship for the first time.
Yeah,
I'm not even
exactly.
blaming.
uh, but yes, it's like they're buds. They like each other. It's fine. But both Kirkwood and Colton had some kind of spicy quotables. It's great. After all of that, Kirkwood basically said, he'll probably be behind us, so I'm not really worried about it, which is funny. And Herta was like, well, he's in a Penske car and is in P20 for like the fifth consecutive weekend, which is again objectively true and hilarious. So both Kyle and both Kyle and Colton were very unbothered by all of this. It was uh, Santino having basically a bitch fit for no reason.
I mean, it's great. We stand unbothered kings on this podcast.
Yes. Um, and then to continue, because this is apparently the feud that just won't die, and god damn it, I really wish this would die, is Ferrucci and Grosjean again. I have had enough. At this point, I just want IndyCar to park both of them for a weekend. But basically, Ferrucci and Grosjean got together. They found each other on track again. And Grosjean wasn't happy about it. Went to go talk to some folks within sort of Foyt crew. And then as he's basically when he's being interviewed about it, a crew member is basically doing the crying thing as he walks through camera shot. And it's like, I just other than Colton and Kyle, I hate everybody involved, and I just like go away, please. But at any rate, moving on to qualifying, uh, Pato would miss out on Fast Six after stalling on track. Marcus also missed, sorry, Fast Six, and then Colton would be on pole for the race. Um, Speaking of the race, good race or not, I already know how you feel about this. But by all means, please do enlighten the crowd.
I mean, I just think like there's like a level of like chaos that I can tolerate from a race, and like if it goes above that threshold of like tolerable chaos, then I don't like the race, and that's basically what happened here. It was chaotic, and I'm like, at first I'm like, yeah, this is funny, this is amusing. These people all can't fucking drive, again for the consecutive weekend again. But after a while, I'm like, you know what? I'm annoyed. I'm tired. I can't keep up with writing all these notes and documenting everything that fucking happened, and now I'm annoyed. So no, I did not like the race.
Yeah, honestly, same. It was a very chaotic race. So just for the sort of statisticians among us, it was a 100-lap race. 47 of those were run under caution, which from a percentage perspective might possibly be a record. Somebody who listens, feel free to enlighten us, provided I don't go back and look this up myself before pushing this episode out. We'll see. But yeah, it was just maniac. And I mean, it started literally from the green. Lap one, I guess turn three. Because to be fair, also the start zone was in a really odd place. It was all kinds of funky. Um, but yes, and you had a bunch of folks go for spins, and we had a parking lot from the drop of the green, basically. Um, then Pelot, who had qualified pretty well, just dropped like a stone through the field, and ended up initially moving to a 3-stop strategy that didn't quite bear out, and I guess we'll see why in a moment. But the alternates were not the move this year. Last year they were. It was very much an alternates, a Reds, although to be fair, the sidewall of the alternates is green now, but it was a Reds race last year, and that wasn't the case this year. And then we get Ferrucci again, and Castroneves had a bit of a coming together, which collected Kiffin Simpson in the process. Ferrucci was given a penalty for this. Then Kristen Rasmussen had an engine failure, but thankfully that didn't bring out a caution. But we did get a caution for McLaughlin in the tire barrier I guess that's no, actually he was on an outlap, I think, because he had just had a tire change. And then Newgarden had a fueling issue. And it's hilarious watching the guy with the fuel rig practically suplexing the intake to try to get the fuel rig to latch. It was just like, oh my God. But and then it started raining. And then the wheels just fell off of this race. Now, for a little bit of context, on the day of the IndyCar race, I was actually over on the west side of town because I had a bit of an emergency come up and I kind of needed to be over there. And I was watching the weather and I'm like, it's getting real dark heading in the direction of downtown. But looking at the radar, I'm like, there's some little cells, but nothing of any real interest. All of it looked like it was off to the north and south. But as it happens, it did rain. You had some drivers opted to stay out and stay on slicks, like Lundgaard with a just legendary radio message of basically, well, hey, let's stay out and see what happens, as he's trying to catch the car because it was sliding because it was wet at safety car speeds, which is wild. Then some did come in because like Herta ended up coming in and a few other folks came in. I think Newgarden came in, I think Pillow and a few other guys, but it was a very, very long yellow flag, which was apparently because race control's having a tough time sorting out car position, which is interesting. But it's funny because Hinch was getting a bit angry on the broadcast about it. Like, why is this so long?
I
But
don't know.
as a director,
They forgot who they were. They disassociated and thought they were IMSA. And they
yeah,
realized they were indoor race control.
yeah, indeed. um, but um, but yes, but as a result of the long yellow, it means that everybody who had come in and pit for wets because basically the track dried up under the yellow flag period. So any advantage that the wets had was basically nullified by the time we did go green, and it vindicated all the guys that decided to stay out on slicks. But as a result of this, yeah, so like Herta, mainly Herta got completely caught out by this. But it was all the things this race, because you had way more penalties than anybody could reasonably keep track of as a result of all of the contact. Trying to keep track of strategy and pit stops is also impossible because everybody pit like 17,000 times during the course of this race. Again, like I said before, you had 47% of this race was run under caution. And as a result, this race was, honest to God, almost 3 hours, which a race at Detroit should not be. It was just everything. But I guess one amusing bit of all of this is that when Colton, I don't know if he was frustrated or if he just outbraked himself, but basically sent it up the inside and almost collected both Pillow and Vautier in the process. He ended up on basically the sort of escape road at that section. And then when being recovered, because I tell you what, the AMR safety team were worth their weight in gold in this race, given the amount of work they had to do. I hope they got paid extra. I don't know how that works, but there should have been a nice bonus for all of the work that they had to do collecting cars out of barriers and what have you in this race. But yeah, I don't know because of course, engaging like reverse and stuff can be a little tricky on those cars. So I don't know if reverse like caught when they were pulling the car out, but it looks like he backed into the safety truck in the process. So I don't know if they pulled the car too hard because even they were getting frustrated by the amount of cautions and the amount of work that they had to do. Or if, like I said, him trying to grab reverse, if it did catch and accidentally backed it into the safety truck. But because you can very clearly see it. You see them basically winch the car out and you see it lurch backwards. And then you see the safety truck rock a little bit. And it's like, and even on the broadcast, it's like, did he hit the safety truck? And the answer to that question was almost positive yes. But yeah, this race was just a mess. No two ways about it. It makes Nashville, particularly like Nashville 2020, it makes that look pretty mild. It makes Laguna Seca last year look pretty mild by comparison. It's just Jesus Christ. But there is one incident that we're going to zero in on for a little bit, just because it's, well, kind of important that we do, actually. And that is one of the 10,000 restarts. And actually, to that end, before we go any further, it's funny because I think it was Kirkwood's strategist was interviewed briefly, and even he was like, well, we're going to have 72 more yellows before we get this thing done. So even the folks actually, like the personnel at the track, were clearly very sick of the amount of incidents that this race was packed with. But anyway, one of the 10,000 restarts, I think it's the one where Power ended up getting into VK, I think. Teo Porcher and Augustin Canapino had a bit of a coming together. Again, it was all a bit odd because Alex Rossi was kind of in the area. It's unclear of who exactly set off that whole chain of events. But as usual, Canapino fans acted like Canapino fans, and Juncos Hollinger Racing were completely useless. So, yeah, JHR and Aaron McLaren, they made a joint statement. Was that this morning? Yesterday? I don't remember
It was
when that
this
was.
morning, I think, or no, I think it was yesterday.
Yeah, time is weird. But at any rate, yeah, it was fairly recently so I think as of the time of this recording, it was Monday, June 3rd. It is Tuesday, June 4th, for further context. Basically saying online hate bad. We've been down this road before with JHR and Canapino fans and the way they behave. But as per usual, Augustine then goes and pours fuel on the fire. And that is getting caught liking tweets that glorify this nonsense. He did this. The same thing was discovered when Callum was in that team. And now it is with Teo because he got caught liking a tweet that basically said that, that this didn't actually happen and that it's, basically this whole joint statement thing was a joke that was unearthed this morning. And then there's one tweet that's like something like, Callum Porcher or something crappy like that. And then as a result of which, he issued a pretty nonsense apology this morning. And basically, the TLDR of that, because like I said, that was complete nonsense too, and it's not really even me worth transcribing what was in that. But basically, he hates being basically bundled in with his brainless rabid fans, and then goes on to basically feign ignorance about seeing death threats, which is that has to be categorically untrue. Um, again, granted, given that he was caught in 4K, liking tweets and being in the replies of some of these folks making these tweets. Um, now, again, because once again, we saw this with Callum Ilott. IndyCar did basically nothing to help this situation. They made a statement. No one saying, quotes, no one should be the victim of online abuse or threats. IndyCar has been in touch with both teams to discuss this matter and made certain where we stand. We all have a responsibility to reinforce a welcoming atmosphere and firmly denounce clear violations of online conduct, end quote. Which is just like, okay, what the hell does that mean?
Nothing. It means nothing.
And that's exactly my point.
Also, even like most of the tweets that like Canapino, at least the tweet of him like in the replies of like the person like joking about death threats and stuff, it's the tweet's still up. As
Yeah.
far as I can see, it's still up. It's not been deleted. So I mean, as of now, it's not been deleted. So I mean, it pretty much renders his apology useless. And I saw like I don't know, his wife was like saying stuff too, and I'm like, you know what? Just take all of these people, like take Ghost Hollinger Racing and him, Santino Ferrucci too, and just jettison all these people into the sun. Like I'm tired of hearing about them. I'm tired of this happening every single time. Canapino has a coming together with some other person on track and they take it too far. It's like, I mean, I'm shocked that they even like knew that that happened. Like I was so confused. Like I was still like it took me so long to try and figure out what exactly this even came from. Like how this all even started in the first fucking place. Because I'm like, there were so many incidents on track. There were so many restarts, so many full course yellows, so many people running into each other. It's like, how did you manage to be laser focused on this one specific incident between Canapino and Porcher when it's like there were so many other things going on? I don't know how you even like hyper focused on this. Like I just think it's just incredible feat of Canapino fans to even do that in the first place.
Yeah, and it's the same. Because I had kind of the same thought. I usually, for I guess kind of lifting the curtain a little bit on sort of how we do things. I'll watch as much as I can. I'll watch these races live, and then I'll usually go back and watch either highlights or I'll watch or like extended highlights, replays, and stuff later before the episodes, kind of to prep. I needed to watch the whole race again because it was so chaotic. And I'm reading through notes, and I'm like, when was this? Where was this? It was so busy. There were so many yellows. There were so many incidents. Like I said, there were more penalties than I care to figure out.
I mean, the majority of them apparently seemingly coming from Willpower, who racked up a
Well,
whopping total of 6 penalties.
yeah, there's that. Yeah, he copped actually quite a few. But
It's like if this was Formula One, it's like he probably would have gotten a race ban all within one race.
yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's just there were so many incidents, so many comings together, so many messages from race control. It's like, how on earth are you laser focused on this one goofball that never runs particularly well? And Taya, it beggars belief. But yes, like we have alluded to, this is not the first time that this has happened. And this will probably not be the last time that something like this happens. But
I mean, it's funny because Canapino said in his tweet, he's like, "Oh, I hope this is the first and last time I make this. I have to talk about this," and it's like, it won't be. I'm telling you right now, it won't be.
no. No, I mean, heck, when Grosjean signed for JHR, it was in his initial press conference, it was a question of, it wasn't a question from the reporter so much of a statement of, well, what's going to happen if you two have a coming together, right? And Grosjean was just kind of, he chuckled nervously and just kind of like, yeah. So, like, this is a very open thing within the IndyCar paddock, which in and of itself, that actually frustrates me a little bit. But yeah, it was just a
It
mess.
really shouldn't be, honestly.
I, again, completely agree. It's wild that you have a team that gets away with being, well, frankly, as crappy as this. But at any rate, moving on because, well, as much as this race absolutely didn't deserve to have a winner by virtue of the way racing works, well, we gotta have one, and that ended up being Scott Dixon, which I guess is as far as protagonists go, I'll take that. Um, he basically it was another fuel saving masterclass, um, which death, taxes, and Scott Dixon pulling fuel out of his ass. These are things that are inevitable, apparently, because with the basically what ended up being the last set of stops, he was absolutely short. And once again, everybody was not convinced that he was going to make it to the end. I don't know why we weren't convinced he was going to make it to the end because he's done this before. Um, and well, he did it again. And so that is another Scott Dixon win, another fuel saving win. And I do believe that puts Scott at the top of the championship points table as of the conclusion of Detroit. So, with that, we head to Road America, the wonderful Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. Um, and well, that is where we will sort of pick up this saga. But that has been the absolutely insane saga of this year's Chevrolet Detroit Grand Prix. With that, we are your hosts, Danny and JT, and until next time.